September 14, 2019. I remember because it was unseasonably warm for Vermont, and my grandmother's house still smelled like the lavender sachets she kept in every drawer. That smell hit me the moment I opened the front door, lavender and something else underneath it. Something I couldn't name then. Something like old paper. Or maybe it was the smell of a house that had held its breath for 3 days, waiting for someone to come back who never would. My grandmother, Edith Warren, died on September 11th. She was 91 years old. The hospice nurse found her in her reading chair, a cup of tea gone cold on the side table, her hands folded in her lap. Peaceful, they said. Which is the kind of word people use when they want the conversation to end. I was her only living relative. My mother passed in 2003, my father never in the picture. So the house, and everything in it, came to me. The estate lawyer met me at the house the following week. His name was Gerald Hoffman, spelled with 2 N's. He was very particular about that, and he'd been handling my grandmother's affairs since before I was born. He walked me through the property, pointing out what would need to be appraised, what I could donate, what should go to auction. I was only half listening. I kept looking at her things. Her reading glasses on the kitchen counter. Her gardening gloves by the back door, still creased in the shape of her hands. Then Gerald handed me a small velvet box. Navy blue, worn at the edges, the kind of box that jewelry stores haven't used since the 1960s. This was specified in the will, he said. She wanted you to have it directly. Didn't want it going through probate. I opened it. Inside, on a little satin cushion that had yellowed with age, was a gold ring. A wedding ring, I assumed a band, simple, maybe 3 millimeters wide. It looked old. Not antique store old. Actually old. I asked Gerald about it. He shrugged. Said the ring had been in the family for generations. Said my grandmother wore it every day of her married life, which was strange, because I'd seen my grandmother's hands 1,000 times, and I didn't remember a ring. Not this one. But grief does things to memory. I know that now. I just didn't know how much. I took the ring home to my apartment in Burlington. Put it in my sock drawer, actually, which I realize sounds disrespectful. But I wasn't ready to look at it. I wasn't ready to look at anything that came from that house. For 2 months, it sat there. November came. The first real cold. And one night, I don't know why, I opened the drawer and took out the velvet box. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I wanted to feel close to her again. The ring was heavier than I expected. Dense. I'm not a jewelry person, so I couldn't tell you what carat or what kind of gold. But when I held it up to my bedside lamp, I noticed something. Inside the band, there was an inscription. The letters were tiny, almost microscopic, and they'd worn down with age. I could make out a date, 1891. And what looked like initials EM or maybe EN. The rest was illegible. My grandmother was born in 1928. Which meant this ring was 37 years older than her. I'm not sure why that unsettled me. Heirlooms get passed down, right? That's the whole point. But something about the math kept nagging at me. 1891, who was EM? What had this ring seen? The next week, I decided to get the ring resized. I don't know what I was planning to do with it, wear it, maybe. It felt like something my grandmother would have wanted. There was a jeweler on Church Street who'd been there forever. Brennan's Fine Jewelry, one of those family-owned places with the display cases that haven't changed since 1985. The kind of store where they still wrap things in tissue paper. The owner, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, took the ring from me with that careful way jewelers have. He held it up to the light. Turned it over. And then, I want to be clear about this, his expression changed. It was subtle. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching. A tightening around the eyes. He set the ring down on the velvet pad between us and said, "Where did you get this?" I told him about my grandmother. About the inheritance. He nodded slowly, not looking at me. Looking at the ring. Then he reached for one of those loop things, the little magnifying eyepieces, and examined the inside of the band for what felt like a full minute. When he straightened up, he slid the ring back toward me. "I can't work on this," he said. "I'm sorry." I asked him why. He didn't answer right away. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, a stalling gesture if I've ever seen one, and finally said, "The inscription. Have you read it?" I told him I couldn't make it out. It was too worn. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And he said, under magnification, "It's clear. And I don't want anything to do with it." Then he walked into the back room and didn't come out. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, waiting for him to return, to explain. He didn't. The shop assistant, a young woman, probably a granddaughter, apologized and said he wasn't feeling well. I left with the ring in my pocket, confused and, I'll admit, a little angry. It felt like a slight against my grandmother somehow. Like he judged her based on a piece of jewelry. That night, I bought a cheap magnifying glass from CVS. The kind meant for reading fine print. I sat at my kitchen table with the ring and the lamp and tried to read the inscription myself. The date was clear, June 17, 1891. And there were initials, but not EM. Under magnification, I could see it was EW Edith Warren. My grandmother's initials. Except, and I need you to understand this, my grandmother wasn't born until 1928. 37 years after that date. There had to be another Edith Warren in the family. That was the obvious answer. A great-grandmother, maybe. The ring was passed down along with the name. That happens, right? Families reuse names. But I couldn't remember my grandmother ever mentioning another Edith. And I'd heard a lot of stories over the years. She loved talking about the family history. Loved showing me photographs. So I drove back to the house in Vermont. This was late November now, cold enough that I could see my breath inside when I first opened the door. The heat had been off for weeks. I went straight to the attic, where my grandmother kept what she called the family archives. Boxes of letters, photographs, documents going back over 100 years. I spent 3 days up there. What I found, or rather, what I didn't find, is difficult to explain. There were birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses for my grandmother's parents, her grandparents, even her great-grandparents on the maternal side. The family tree was meticulously documented. But there was no Edith Warren before my grandmother. And there was no wedding in 1891. The only marriage record I could find from that era was for a woman named Eliza Morrow, who married a man named Thomas Harwick in April of 1891. 2 months before the date on the ring. Eliza was my grandmother's great-great-grandmother on her mother's side. The paper trail ended there. After 1891, Eliza Morrow, now Eliza Harwick, simply disappeared from the records. I'm not a genealogist. I'm a middle school English teacher. But I know how to research, and I know when something doesn't add up. For the next month, I dug. I contacted the Vermont Historical Society. I paid for access to 3 different ancestry databases. I even found an old newspaper archive from the town where Eliza lived, a place called Barton Field, about 30 miles from my grandmother's house. It doesn't exist anymore. The town, I mean. Barton Field was abandoned in 1903. The official reason was an agricultural decline, the soil went bad, crops failed, families moved west. But the newspaper archive told a different story. Between 1891 and 1902, 11 women disappeared from Barton Field. All married. All between the ages of 19 and 34. And here's what I can't stop thinking about: all 11 disappearances happened in June. Eliza Morrow wasn't the first. She wasn't even the most recent. But she was the only one connected to my family. And she disappeared on June 17, 1891. The same date inscribed inside the ring. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. I know you're probably thinking I've connected dots that don't exist. Trust me, I thought the same thing. But then I found the photograph. It was in a box I'd already searched twice. A small tintype, no bigger than a playing card, tucked inside an envelope that was yellowed and brittle. The envelope was addressed to no one. The photograph showed a woman, young, dark-haired, wearing what looked like a wedding dress. Her expression was neutral, the way people looked in old photographs because of the long exposure times. But her hands, I noticed her hands first. She was holding them in front of her, fingers interlaced, and on her left hand was a ring. A simple gold band. The photograph was too small and too damaged to make out details, but I was certain in a way I couldn't explain, that it was the same ring. The one sitting in my sock drawer 200 miles away. I turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back, faded almost to nothing. I had to use a flashlight at an angle to make it out. It said, Eliza, June 17, 1891. Before. Before what? Before the wedding? Before something else? And if this was Eliza Morrow, why did the ring say EW? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my grandmother's old bed, in her empty house, and I thought about the jeweler. About how he'd refused to touch the ring. About the look in his eyes. What had he seen under magnification that I'd missed? In the morning, I drove to Burlington. Not to Brennan's, I couldn't face that man again, but to the university. A friend of a friend worked in the geology department, and they had equipment for examining mineral samples. Close enough to jewelry, I figured. Her name was Dr. Reyes. She was skeptical when I explained what I wanted, but she agreed to look. She placed the ring under what she called a stereo microscope, powerful magnification, much better than my CVS magnifying glass. For a while, she said nothing. Then she asked me, "Are you sure you want to see this?" I said yes. I wasn't sure at all. She stepped aside and let me look. The inscription came into sharp focus. June 17, 1891. And below that, 2 lines of text. The first said EW, but the second line, and I had to adjust the angle to see it clearly, said something else. 4 words. Eliza, where's me now? I don't remember leaving the lab. I don't remember driving back to my grandmother's house. The next clear memory I have is sitting at her kitchen table, the ring in front of me, the tintype photograph beside it. I was comparing them. The ring in the photo. The ring on the table. The same curve. The same width. And then I looked at the woman's face. at Eliza Morrow's face. I had a photograph of my grandmother as a young woman. It was framed in the hallway. Taken in 1949, the year she got married. I went to get it. I brought it back to the table. I held it next to the tintype. And I want you to understand, I'm not saying they looked alike. I'm saying they were the same face. The same nose, the same jawline, the same distance between the eyes. Identical. People look like their ancestors. That's how genetics works. I tried to tell myself that. But this wasn't resemblance. This wasn't, oh, you have your great-great-grandmother's eyes. This was the same woman. The exact same woman, 58 years apart, in two different photographs, with two different names. I spent the next week in a kind of fugue state. I kept researching, but I don't know what I was looking for anymore. Confirmation? Denial? I found records showing that Eliza Morrow was 23 when she disappeared. My grandmother was 21 when she got married in 1949. I found records showing that Thomas Harwick, Eliza's husband, died of a heart attack in 1893, 2 years after his wife vanished. He was 27 years old. My grandfather, Peter Warren, died of a heart attack in 1951. 2 years after marrying my grandmother. He was 29. I know this sounds insane. I know how correlation and causation work. I'm a teacher, for God's sake. But I also know what I saw in those photographs. And I know what the ring says. Eliza wears me now. I called the jeweler. Mr. Brennan. I called him at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and when he heard my voice, he didn't hang up. He said, I wondered if you'd call. I asked him what he knew. There was a long pause. Then he said, my father worked on that ring in 1952. A resizing job, for a young woman named Edith. He told me about it before he died. Told me to never touch it if it ever came back. I asked him why. What was wrong with it? He said his father told him the inscription changed. That when Edith first brought it in, it said one thing. But by the time the work was done, it said something different. EW had appeared where another set of initials used to be. I asked what the original initials were. He said his father wouldn't tell him. Only that they belonged to someone who wasn't alive anymore. I thought. Eliza Morrow. The inscription had changed from Eliza Morrow to Eliza Wears to Edith Warren. That's what I was thinking. That somehow, the ring recorded its owners. Or changed them. Or took them. I still don't know which. But then Mr. Brennan said something that made me go cold. He said, check the ring again. The inscription might be different now. My father said it changes when it's ready. I hung up. I went to the sock drawer. I took out the velvet box. And I looked at the ring with my magnifying glass, even though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The date was still there, June 17, 1891. And the initials were still EW. But underneath, where Eliza Wears Me Now had been, there was something new. 4 different words. I read them 3 times to make sure. Then I put the ring back in the box, closed the drawer, and called my mother's cousin in Oregon. The only other person alive who might know anything about the family history. Her name was Margaret. She was 78 years old, and she hadn't spoken to my grandmother in over 40 years. Some family disagreement that happened before I was born. I didn't know the details. But when I asked her about the ring, about Eliza Morrow, about Barton Field, about the disappearances, she didn't ask how I knew. She just laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "Your grandmother was supposed to tell you," Margaret said. "When you were old enough. It's why I stopped speaking to her. She wanted to keep the secret. I wanted to burn that thing. We couldn't agree. I asked her what secret. What the ring actually was. And she said, and I'm going to do my best to repeat this exactly, she said, it's not a ring. It's a door." I didn't understand. I still don't, really. But Margaret kept talking, and I let her. She told me that the ring had been in the family for as long as anyone could remember. That it was older than 1891. That the date in the inscription wasn't when the ring was made, it was when Eliza put it on for the last time. When she went through. Went through where? I asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know. Nobody knows. But the women who wear it, they change. Slowly, over years. They become something else. And when the ring decides it's time, they disappear. And then someone new inherits it. Someone in the family. Always a woman. Always unmarried. And the cycle starts again." I asked her about my grandmother. About how she lived to 91, married, had a daughter, had a granddaughter, me, and never disappeared. "She never wore it," Margaret said. "After 1952, she never put it on again. She said she saw something when they resized it. Something in the gold. And she swore she'd never let it touch her skin. She kept it in that box for 67 years. I thought about my grandmother's hands. How I'd never seen a ring on them. How she always wore long sleeves, even in summer. How she'd pull away sometimes when I reached for her, a flinch so small I dismissed it as age. But maybe it wasn't age. Maybe she was protecting me. Or protecting herself." Before Margaret hung up, she asked me a question. "Have you worn it yet?" I said no. Which was true. I'd held it, examined it, obsessed over it, but I'd never put it on my finger. She said, "Good. Don't. Not even to try it on. Promise me." I promised. But even as I said the words, I could feel the ring in the drawer. Feel it the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. That was 3 months ago. The ring is still in the velvet box, in my sock drawer. I haven't touched it since that phone call. But I look at the drawer sometimes. Late at night, when I can't sleep, when the apartment is too quiet. And I wonder what the inscription says now. Whether it's changed again. Whether my initials are there yet. I want to tell you what the new inscription said, the one I saw after I talked to the jeweler, before I called Margaret. But I'm not going to. Because I think some things shouldn't be said out loud. Because I think the ring might be listening. Because 4 words were enough to make me understand why my grandmother never wore it. And why she left it to me anyway. I've thought about destroying it. Melting it down, throwing it into Lake Champlain, burying it in concrete. But Margaret called me last week. She'd been thinking about our conversation. She wanted to tell me something she'd forgotten. Something her mother told her, years ago, about a cousin in the 1930s who tried to get rid of the ring. Threw it into a well on the family property. The ring was back in her jewelry box the next morning. The cousin was gone. Never found. No body, no note, no indication of where she went. Just an empty bed and a ring that shouldn't have been there. Margaret said, "You can't destroy it. You can only give it away. And if you give it away, well, then it's someone else's problem. Someone outside the family. You want that on your conscience?" I don't. I don't want any of this. But I don't know what else to do. So the ring stays in the drawer. And I don't open it. And I try not to think about June 17th, which is coming up soon. 5 months from now. The anniversary. The date when Eliza went through. The date when, according to Margaret, the ring is most likely to call someone new. I've started sleeping with the light on. I know how childish that sounds. But in the dark, I can hear something. Not the ring itself, that would be too easy, too obvious. Something else. A kind of humming, just below the threshold of hearing. Like the resonance of metal when you strike it. Like something waiting to be worn. Last night, I dreamed about Eliza Morrow. She was standing in a doorway, not a door in a house, but a door in the middle of an empty field. Behind her was darkness. Not shadow. Actual darkness, thick and absolute. She was wearing the ring. And she was smiling. Not a cruel smile. A welcoming one. Like she'd been expecting me. Like she'd been waiting a very long time. I woke up with my hand in the sock drawer. I don't remember getting out of bed. I don't remember walking across the room. But my fingers were wrapped around the velvet box, and the latch was open. The ring was right there. An inch from my skin. I closed the drawer so hard I bruised my hand. I'm not sure why I'm telling you this. Maybe I need someone else to know. Maybe I think that if enough people hear this story, it'll break whatever hold the ring has. Or maybe I'm just scared, and talking about it makes it feel less real. Less inevitable. But here's what I haven't been able to shake, the question that keeps me awake at night. My grandmother knew what this ring was. She knew for 67 years. And she chose to leave it to me anyway. Not to donate it. Not to bury it. To give it to me, her only granddaughter. She must have had a reason. She must have thought I could handle it somehow. Or maybe, and this is the thought I can't escape, maybe she didn't have a choice. Maybe the ring chooses who it goes to next. And all my grandmother could do was delay the inevitable. If you're listening to this late at night, which I imagine most of you are, I want to ask you something. If you find something in your family's belongings, something old, something that doesn't quite make sense, be careful. Look at it closely. Look at it under magnification if you can. And if there's an inscription that seems wrong, or words that shouldn't be there, or a date that doesn't add up, put it back. Close the box. Walk away. Not everything that's passed down is a gift. Some things are just waiting for their next owner. And some doors, once you open them, don't close again. The ring is still in my drawer. June 17th is still coming. And I can still hear that humming, late at night, when everything else is quiet. It's getting louder. I think it knows I'm running out of time. I think it's almost ready for me. One last thing. I checked the inscription again this morning. The words had changed. They always change, Margaret said. When the ring is getting ready. And I know I said I wouldn't tell you what it said before. But I'll tell you what it says now. Because maybe you should know. Maybe you can help me figure out what it means. The inscription says, She is listening now. I don't know who she is. And I don't want to find out.